The day the bet was made, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew something the men standing in that dusty field did not. The wind moved slowly across the cracked earth, lifting thin ribbons of dirt into the air, whispering of failure, of drought, of defeat. And right there, in the middle of that barren land, a man named Daniel Harper stood with nothing but hope in his eyes, while his neighbor, Victor Kane, laughed loud enough for the whole valley to hear. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of never giving up, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It means more than you think. Daniel had bought the land everyone else had rejected. It was cheap, they said, because it was cursed. 5 years of failed crops had turned the soil into a lifeless stretch of dust. Farmers whispered that nothing could grow there anymore, that the land had simply given up. But Daniel saw something different. He saw possibility buried beneath the dryness, like a story waiting to be rewritten. Victor Kane, on the other hand, was everything Daniel was not. He was loud, confident, and successful. His fields stretched wide and green just beyond Daniel's property, and his harvests were the pride of the region. People respected him, feared him even. And when Daniel arrived with his old truck, his worn tools, and his quiet determination, Victor saw nothing but an easy target. The bet came casually, almost like a joke. Victor smirked and said he would give Daniel 5 years. 5 years to prove that his dead land could produce anything worth selling. If it didn't, Daniel would owe him $1,000, a sum that might as well have been impossible for a man who had already spent everything he had just to buy the land. And if Daniel somehow succeeded, Victor would publicly admit he was wrong. The laughter that followed echoed long after the men had gone home. The first year was brutal. The soil refused to cooperate. Seeds dried out before they could sprout, and the little rain that came disappeared into the ground as if it had never fallen. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, digging, turning, experimenting. His hands blistered and bled, his back ached constantly, and there were nights he lay awake wondering if Victor had been right all along. But Daniel didn't quit. He began studying the land like it was alive. He learned about soil health, about natural composting, about how certain plants could restore nutrients. He started small, planting cover crops instead of cash crops, even though it meant he would earn nothing that year. People called him foolish. They said he was wasting time on something that would never change. The second year was no kinder. A storm destroyed part of what little progress he had made. The wind tore through his field, flattening his plants and scattering his hopes. Victor drove by that morning, slowing his truck just enough to shake his head in mock sympathy before driving off with a grin. Daniel stood in the middle of the wreckage, the silence heavier than any insult. For a moment, it felt like the land itself was rejecting him. But instead of walking away, he knelt down, picked up the broken plants, and started again. By the third year, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. The soil held moisture a little longer. The plants grew a little stronger. Small patches of green began to appear where there had once been nothing but dust. Daniel didn't celebrate. He simply worked harder. He collected rainwater in barrels, built simple irrigation channels, and continued enriching the soil with organic matter. Every improvement was the result of patience, not luck. Every inch of progress was earned through persistence. Meanwhile, Victor's fields continued to flourish, until they didn't. The fourth year brought an unexpected drought, one harsher than any in recent memory. Victor's crops, which relied heavily on traditional methods and constant water supply, began to wither. The rich green fields turned pale, then brown. The harvest that had once been his pride became his greatest worry. Daniel's land, however, told a different story. Because of the years he had spent rebuilding the soil, it now retained water more effectively. His crops, though not perfect, survived. They stood resilient against the harsh sun, their roots anchored deep in the revitalized earth. People began to notice. They came quietly at first, standing at the edge of Daniel's field, observing the difference. They asked questions, curious but cautious. Daniel answered them without pride, sharing what he had learned, not to prove a point, but because he believed knowledge should be given freely. Victor noticed too, but instead of admitting anything, he grew bitter. He blamed the weather, the timing, anything but himself. Yet deep down, he knew something had changed, not just in Daniel's land, but in the way people looked at him. The 5th year arrived like a final test. Daniel planted his most ambitious crop yet. It was a risk, but one he believed in. The months that followed were filled with tension. Every sunrise brought hope, and every sunset carried a hint of fear. But slowly, steadily, the field transformed. Green spread across the land like a promise fulfilled. The plants grew tall and strong, their leaves vibrant, their roots deep. When harvest season came, Daniel stood in the middle of his field, overwhelmed by what he saw. It wasn't just a successful crop. It was a miracle built from patience, resilience, and unwavering belief. Word spread quickly. Buyers came from neighboring towns, eager to purchase what Daniel had grown. His field, once mocked as dead land, became a symbol of possibility. And then, one quiet morning, a familiar truck pulled up. Victor Kane stepped out, not with his usual confidence, but with something unfamiliar, hesitation. His fields had failed again, and this time, he had no excuses left. He walked across the land he had once laughed at, his eyes taking in the life that now thrived there. Daniel met him without anger, without pride, just with the same calm presence he had always carried. Victor didn't mention the bet. He didn't need to. Instead, he asked for something far more humbling. He asked to buy seeds. In that moment, the balance of everything shifted. The man who had once mocked now stood in quiet respect. The laughter of 5 years ago faded into something distant, almost unreal. Daniel didn't refuse. He didn't remind Victor of the past. He simply nodded and helped him, because he understood something Victor was only beginning to learn, that growth isn't just about the land, it's about the person. And now, before the story reaches its end, take a moment to comment something meaningful, maybe a word like hope, patience, or never give up, so others can feel the message of this story too. As the seasons passed, Victor slowly changed. He began to adopt the same methods Daniel had used, learning not just from his success, but from his journey. Their relationship shifted from rivalry to quiet understanding, built not on pride, but on respect. Daniel never became loud or boastful. He remained the same man who had once stood alone in a field of dust, believing in something no one else could see. And the land never forgot. It continued to grow, to give, to remind everyone who saw it that even the most broken ground can be healed with patience, care, and unwavering faith. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, share, and comment. It helps stories like this reach more people who might need a reminder that no matter how impossible things seem, change is always possible. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not in proving others wrong, but in proving to yourself that you were right to believe all along.